শিপ্রার অপর তটে নেমে আসে সুদীর্ঘ রজনী। শীর্ণ তরুবিথিকারে আত্মসাৎ করে অন্ধকার। বিদায়, বিদায় তবে চিরতরে, বিদায় সজনী। সমাপ্ত সুকৃতি আজি, স্বর্গচ্যুতি আসন্ন আমার। কি বলে অদৃশ্য হব, রেখে যাব কোন প্রতিশ্রুতি? মাগিব কি স্মৃতিচিহ্ন, বিনিময়ে করিব কি আশা? অন্তরের অন্তরিক্ষে গুমরিছে মর্তের আকুতি। বিনাশ, নৈরাশ, অশ্রু, নিষ্ফলতা, কর্তব্য পিপাসা।
While returning to India after his tour of Europe and America, Sudhindranath wrote Orchestra while traveling in the ship. His experience of a post-World War Europe might have injected these feelings of despair, of nothingness and decay.
These near nihilistic feelings had long-lasting impressions on his subsequent writings. Sudhindranath Dutta was born in the famous traditional Dutta family of Calcutta. His forefathers were known as the Dottas of Chorabagan. The East India Company occupied their property after the War of Plassey to build Fort William, and they were given land at Chorabagan, presently known as Muktaram Babu Street.
Sudhindranath's grandfather, late Dwarkanath Dutta, shifted to Hathibagan. But Sudhindranath used to visit his forefather's traditional house in Chorabagan, which got imprinted in his memory. And he remembered those experiences when he wrote his autobiography.
Sudhindranath was born in his maternal grandfather's house at Potoldanga, in a very famous, cultured and traditional family. One of his maternal forefathers went to study in Cambridge University, which created a tremendous turmoil in the family. And Sudhindranath's maternal grandfather left his house and built a new house at 12 Wellington Street. In course of time, this house became the epicenter of the Swadeshi movement. Rishi Aurobindo stayed at this house after returning from Baroda. Sudhindranath's father, Hirendranath Dutta, was highly educated and an accomplished person. He was a prolific reader. He had deep knowledge of Sanskrit and English. He wrote articles on Kavi Kalidas and Shakespeare. Sudhindranath's early education was influenced by his father, and he came close to Ibsen, Coleridge, and Victor Hugo. His father was a preacher of patriotic values and a well-known educationist. His uncle, Amarendranath Dutta, unlike his family members, was an extremely colorful person. He was an artist in the true sense of the term. In his early days, he was a disciple of the great theatre personality Girish Ghosh. He himself was a commendable actor. He established his own theatre and named it Classic Theatre. His dramatic activities had some influence on Sudhindranath. First, he studied in Theosophical School in Benares, established by Annie Besant. There he was taught English by Miss Harrington. Moreover, he was also taught Sanskrit. He later came back to Kolkata and studied in the Oriental Seminary and then joined the Scottish Church College. His subjects were Sanskrit, logic and history. Returning from Benares, he came close to his maternal uncle's house at 12 Wellington Street and was gradually inclined towards Western culture and habits. His first published poem was Meg the Cloud.
Sudhindranath used to write his poems in exercise books and often rewrote them. He often even changed the names at the time of rewriting. Although a common practice among poets, Sudhindranath is singular in that he often completely abandoned the earlier structure. Moreover, he even rewrote his early poems and included them in collections of his more mature work.
Sudhindranath first met Rabindranath, introducing himself as the son of Hirendranath Dutta, and his perception and literary depth in his work were praised by Rabindranath. He had gone to Shantiniketan and had shown his poems to Gurudev, and both of them interacted through letters several times. He wrote,
আবর্জনা প্রপীড়িত বাংলাকে নতুন জঞ্জালের চাপে আরো ব্যথিত করা যুক্তিযুক্ত হবে না ভেবেই অতুচ্ছ কবিতাগুলো আপনার সামনে হাজির করতে সাহসী হয়েছিল।
Sudhindranath's first book, Tunni, was merely influenced by Rabindranath. He wrote in the preface of the book that if something substantial is found in the whole of the book, that should be recognized as a fraction of Rabindranath's own. Tunni was criticized by Buddhadev Bose. He believed that most of the poems were merely influenced by Rabindranath. Some examples can be cited. যদি স্মিত হেসে এলে অবশেষে আসনায় কেন লগনে, অথবা আমি তব নাম লয়ে করেছিনু খেলা. In the later phase of his writing, Sudhindranath changed his style and content to a great extent. In 1930, Sudhindranath started a journal, Parichay. The journal created a commotion among the intelligentsia and was a new kind of journal in Bengali. Intellectually, it was a journal of high standard. The journal would have a weekly get-together of its members on every Friday and was famous for its intellectual discourse. Other participants were Sushobhan Sarkar, Hiren Mukherjee, Humayun Kabir, and others. They used to discuss the post-war socio-intellectual crisis and allied topics. During this period, he relentlessly continued writing. Either he wrote poems or translated poems and novels written in English, German, and French language.
সুধীন্দ্রনাথ তিনি যে পরিচয় পত্রিকা প্রকাশ করলেন, তার স্বভাবে, চারিত্রে, বৈশিষ্ট্যে সমস্ত দিক থেকেই পূর্ববর্তী যে কাগজগুলো, লিটল ম্যাগাজিনগুলো, কল্লোল, কালিকলম বা প্রগতি, পূর্বাশা, এদের থেকে সম্পূর্ণ স্বতন্ত্র। এবং সেখানে আমরা দেখলাম যে আধুনিক মানুষের যে জ্ঞান পিপাসা, তার মনন চর্চা, তার যে বুদ্ধির জগৎ, এইটাকে খুব গুরুত্ব সহকারে স্থান দেওয়া হলো। এবং জ্ঞানের যে বিভিন্ন দিক, অর্থাৎ ইতিহাস, বিজ্ঞান, দর্শন, মনস্তত্ত্ব, নৃতত্ত্ব, সমাজতত্ত্ব, অর্থনীতি, ইতিহাস, যাবতীয় বিষয়কে শিল্পের অঙ্গীভূত করা, যেটা আমরা পরিচয়ের বৈশিষ্ট্য বলে চিহ্নিত করি, এটা বাংলা কবিতায় বা বাংলা সাহিত্যে আগে আমরা দেখিনি।
Sudhindranath's second book of poetry, Orchestra, was published in 1935.
নিভে গেল দীপাবলি, অকস্মাৎ অস্ফুট গুঞ্জন স্তব্ধ হল পরীক্ষাগৃহে। অপনীত প্রচ্ছদের তলে বাদ্য সমবায় হতে আরম্ভিল নিঃসাঙ্গ বাঁশরি নম্র কণ্ঠে মরমী আহ্বান।
Against the perspective of dramatic exuberance, the poet and his beloved will meet. But the fragrance of this meeting will be unlike Rabindranath's world of love. শূন্যে হঠাৎ লুপ্ত বসুন্ধরা, ত্রিভুবনে কেবল তুমি আমি, সৃজন প্রাতের প্রথম যমক মোরা, প্রলয় রাতের শেষ বনিতা স্বামী.
We can find that his concept of love has come with a profound demand, unlike the style of Rabindranath.
His unending agony has played an important role in his book Orchestra. It is said that during his trip to Europe with Rabindranath, he met a lady and fell in love. Images of the blue-eyed, Nilabho Dushar Chok lady often appears in his poems. Love is a central theme of Orchestra, and his love is of physicality and of frustration. তোমারে যে কেন বাসি ভালো, সে সত্য জানার আগে মিলনের মুহূর্ত ফুরালো, শুরু হলো দীর্ঘায়িত বিচ্ছেদের রাতি.
He goes down memory lane of his Europe tour and recalls his love. And we can trace the obvious indifference and frustration in his choice of words. জানি জানি উপস্থিত বেদনা ও গ্লানি, আমারই প্রবীণ চক্ষে লাগিবে মূঢ়তার মতো একদিন আশু ভবিষ্যতে।
অর্কেস্ট্রার কবিতা, প্রেমের কবিতা, সেই প্রেমের আরতি আকুলতা, তার সঙ্গে সঙ্গে বুদ্ধি এবং মননের প্রাধান্য। কবিতার ভাষায়, চিত্রকল্পে, শব্দবন্ধে যে পৌরুষ, যেটার অভাব আমরা অনুভব করছিলাম, যে জীবনানন্দের কবিতা সম্পূর্ণ ভিন্ন স্বাদের, ভিন্ন ধরনের পাঠককে তা মোহিত করে রেখেছিল। সুধীন্দ্রনাথের কবিতা মোহিত করে রাখবার কবিতা নয়, তাকে কিন্তু মনন দিয়ে, বুদ্ধি দিয়ে চর্চা করতে হয়, কিন্তু তারও একটা সঙ্গীতের লাবণ্য ছিল।
Before publication of Orchestra in 1935, he wrote in an article in 1932 and said, language of poetry should be different from the colloquial language. And in fact, poetry can never deny the dominations of language. And his usage of words was bombastic, Sanskritized, and often rare.
He used the word onishto in Bangla. Malagme's Kabbadarsha, Malagme's poetic, is my onishto, is what I'm aiming at. We can see the emphasis Malagme put on the word. Poetry is made of words. To give a purer sense to everyday words. That is, the poet is not creating words. The poet is trying to manipulate words which are communal property. But he uses word in such a sense that he gets most out of that. And that sense of purification, that sense of word being the ultimate object of the poet, is what attracted Sudhindranath to Malagme. In terms of his themes, in terms of the experiences trying to communicate, he is un-Malagmean, except perhaps in the sense of, the experience of nothing that you come across his poetry again and again.
Buddhadev Bose criticized orchestra and said that Sudhindranath wrote for the sake of writing. He also criticized a serious tone and complicated way of expression. On the other hand, he praised his vocabulary and usage of words and termed him as a classical poet. After long 10 years, he wrote in Kaler Putul that his criticism of orchestra was incorrect.
His third book of poems, Krandushi, was published in 1937.
In this book, as a poet, he deviated his path from personal love and frustration to a wider perspective of reality and existence. The influence of T.S. Eliot can be found in this phase of his literary work. Long back in 1928, he had said about T.S. Eliot's poetry to some poets and intellectuals at the University Institute Hall.
In the meantime, the Great War started, and the cacophony of perilous sounds erased the folk songs that were close to the soil. But what remains to be understood was that peace was more suffocating, more inducive of solitude, and more dangerous than war.
As a poet, he expresses his agony. আরোগ্যহীন রোগের বিষে ছটপটিয়ে উঠবে আবার দেহ, এই নিরালা স্বপ্নমগন ঘর লাগবে অন্ধকূপের সমান. Post-war reality remains the perspective of his poems in Krandoshi. He was well informed about the contemporary crisis. আমার কথা কি শুনতে পাও না তুমি, কেন মুখ গুজে আছো তবে মিছে ছলে, কোথায় লুকাবে ধুধু করে মরুভূমি, ক্ষয়ে ক্ষয়ে ছায়া মরে গেছে পদতলে, আজ দিগন্তে মরীচিকাও যে নেই, নির্বাক নীল নির্মম মহাকাশ. উটপাখি, ক্রন্দশী. As a result, we can see that the perspective of love has changed and anchored itself in a greater backdrop of realism. The poet is always in a questioning mood and is living in a dwindling state of mind. ভগবান ভগবান, রিক্ত নাম তুমি কি কেবলই, নেই তুমি যথার্থ কি নেই, প্রশ্ন ক্রন্দশী. The poet is not even sure about the existence of the Almighty, as he has experienced that time erodes everything.
His next book, Sambarta, was published in 1953. The perspective of these poems are wider. International politics, Marxist philosophy, the rise and fall of Nazi nationalism, and the partial alliance of Nazi and Soviet forces in 1939 had great influence on Sudhindranath. রাইনে জুড়ায় বার্সেলোনার দাহ, স্পেনে নিষিদ্ধ যদিও ধর্মঘট.
During his first tour of Europe, Sudhindranath witnessed a scene of great revelry among the Nazis, who were establishing themselves.
And he condemned fascism. Initially, he was sympathetic towards the Soviet-Russian cause, but gradually his hopes faded in the wake of the gross atrocities and perpetrated in the Stalinist era. He alienated himself from politics and initiated a search for inner truth.
Later, he wrote an essay in English called The Liberal Retrospect. He called himself, this was in 1945, and that came out in The Marxian Way. M.N. Roy was editor of that magazine. Sudhindranath Dutta was closely involved with it. And the first essay of the first number of that magazine was Liberal Retrospect by Sudhindranath Dutta. He called himself a liberal, and he defined liberalism in a very, I would say, in a very positive way.
And he wrote, এরই আয়োজন অর্ধশতক ধরে, দুটো যুদ্ধে একাধিক বিপ্লবে, কোটি কোটি সব পচে অগভীর গড়ে, মেদিনী মুখর একনায়কের স্তবে.
Sambarta itself is full of contemporary reference. It's a poem on the Second World War. There is a poem called 1945, তুমি বলেছিলে জয় হবে জয় হবে. You said victory is ours, we'll win. See? But if you go into that poem, you'll see that it's full of reference. See? Now, that way, he is, I wouldn't say the antipodes of Mallarmé, but he is quite unlike Malakme.
In the late 40s and in the early 50s, he stopped writing for a prolonged period.
1950-51 সালের কথা, তখন আমার ছাত্রাবস্থা। প্রেসিডেন্সি কলেজের বাংলা ক্লাসে ডক্টর হরপ্রসাদ মিত্র বাংলা পড়াতে পড়াতে সুধীন্দ্রনাথের নাম উল্লেখ করলেন এবং পরিচয়ের আড্ডা সম্বন্ধেও কিছু কথাবার্তা বললেন। তখন জ্যাঠামশাইয়ের লেখা সম্পূর্ণ বন্ধ ছিল। প্রশ্ন করলাম, তোমার এত খ্যাতি সত্ত্বেও তুমি লেখা বন্ধ করে রেখেছো কেন? উত্তরে উনি বললেন, যা বলার বলা হয়ে গেছে, যা লেখার লেখা হয়ে গেছে, আর কিছু বলার নেই, বলেই সেই হাসি।
His last book of poetry, Dashami, was published in 1956.
Dashami continues what is said in Jajati. Yeah, Jajati is a fascinating poem. See. Now, if you take lines like his very last poem, the poem is Krishna Chura Nishede Matha Nare Kulaye Khoje Shuk Chaitra Shesh Suchito Hare Hare Surjo Adhomuk. He has himself translated it into, it's called The Vagrant in the English translation. The very last line is, see, তাহলে কেন বিরহী সুখ নিরুদ্দেশে ঘোরে মজায় কাকে অনাত্মীয় আমা? It ends on a question mark.
আমরা দেখলাম যে একই সঙ্গে বেশ কয়েকজন শক্তিশালী তরুণ কবি, তাদের অভ্যুদয় হলো 30-এর দশকের একেবারে গোড়ার দিক থেকে। জীবনানন্দ দাশ, সুধীন্দ্রনাথ দত্ত, বিষ্ণুদে, বুদ্ধদেব বসু, অমিয় চক্রবর্তী। সুধীন্দ্রনাথ এদের মধ্যে সমস্ত দিক থেকেই অত্যন্ত সচেতন এবং স্বতন্ত্র কবি। বাংলা কবিতায় এই জীবনানন্দ, বুদ্ধদেব, তাদের যদি একটা ধারা হয়ে থাকে, রোম্যান্টিকতারই অনুসরণ তাদের কবিতায় তখন পর্যন্ত চলছে। অন্যদিকে সুধীন্দ্রনাথ, বিষ্ণুদে, তারা পরবর্তীকালে এরা একটা নতুন ধারা তৈরি করলেন, যেখানে সমাজ, ইতিহাস এবং ব্যক্তি এই দুটোকে কিন্তু মিলিয়ে দেখবার চেষ্টা আমরা দেখলাম। যে ব্যক্তির সঙ্গে সমাজের যে ওতপ্রোত সম্বন্ধ, তার দ্বন্দ্ব এবং তার সংকট, তার যে টেনশন, এগুলিকে কবিতায় তুলে ধরা, এটা সুধীন্দ্রনাথের প্রথম থেকেই দেখছি আমরা।
In his early days, Vishnudev was a poet of social decay, anarchy, and a poet of indifference. Samarsen was also an urban poet and a balladeer of frustration and decay. He wrote, শূন্য মাঠে কোটরহীন চোখের মতো গ্যাসের আলো ঝোলে।
সব রকমের কবিতাকে আত্মস্থ করে বাংলা কবিতাকে একটা নতুন জায়গায় তিনি নিয়ে গেলেন। এবং সবচেয়ে বড় কথা যে সেখানে কোনো রকম আপোষের স্থান ছিল না। কবিতার ব্যাপারে সুধীন্দ্রনাথ একেবারে নিজস্ব একটি ভঙ্গি, নিজস্ব একটি রীতি, এটাকে খুঁজে পেয়েছিলেন।
The war and the aftermath to war, you see, all that bred this sense of neo, nothing, nasti in him. Two very interesting lines there. অনুমানে শুরু সমাধা অনিশ্চয় জীবন পীড়িত প্রত্যয়ে প্রত্যয়ে. See, he's trying to give final expression to what he had said in Jajati, what in a way he had said in Sangbarto, I mean the title poem of Sangbarto. The last lines you surely will recall. See, Haturi, Nishpishto, Trotsky, Hitler, Shurit, Stalin. This was in 1940. See, you think of 1945, then you come to 1953, Jajati, then 1956, you have 1954 to 56, you have the Dashami poems. So you will see that gradually he has come. See, he has developed this idea of nothing, see, of nasti, and I would say he's a very consistent poet. He's a very consistent mind. See, that he would end his poetic career with a question mark. See, তাহলে কেন বিরহী সুখ নিরুদ্দেশ্যে ঘোরে মাজায় কাকে অনাত্মীয় আমার? What is the purpose then? What is the purpose of creation? What is the purpose of life?